dreams are a way of life. Dreams are information that help inform us of what is happening in the spirit world, what is happening with the ancestors, what is being asked of us personally, etc. The Achuar people awaken before dawn. They drink a large amount of Wayusa tea and they share their dreams with each other. And the elders interpret the dreams. As I began to know and be in relationship with more and more Indigenous peoples, I saw that that was often a practice and a value that was shared amongst many cultures. And I was very fortunate to have many teaching dreams during the years of writing this book.
Hilary Giovale, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you on this delightful summer day? It's the morning for you, I believe.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for having me, Amanda. It's a joy to be with you today. And I am having a lovely morning so far. I was out for a walk in the woods this morning, looking at the wildflowers and the pine trees and smelling all the oils in the air. And
Nice.
I am sitting on Hopi, Havasupai, Dene, Apache, Pueblo land
Wow.
in what is now known as Northern Arizona. And I'm sitting next to a sacred mountain of kinship. She is sitting over my right shoulder, and she is known by all of the indigenous peoples as of this region as a sacred being.
Right.
She's, and some of them have told me that she's considered a female, a grandmother, that her energy and her medicine is one of love and kinship. And
Right.
so that is who is sitting right next to me here over my right shoulder.
Magic. Thank you. How long have you been there?
I have lived here over 30 years. I moved
Right.
here in the early 90s to go to college, and
Wow.
I never left.
Right. Beautiful. In a minute, we're going to come to your book, but what really interests me there is you named a lot of tribes who all had this land. And I find that that's something that I believe is also the case in the lands of Britain, is that we have a tendency to think that borders, as we know them now, were borders for Indigenous peoples, and that actually there was a lot of sharing. The land was not owned and it wasn't divided, and there wasn't that Hobbesian sense of a geographic boundary within which a political entity claims a monopoly on legal violence. That's all trauma culture concept. And that if there's a sacred mountain, everybody shares in its sacredness. It's not that a tribe owns that sacred mountain and the sacredness is all theirs. It's that this is an expansive, flowing gift from whatever we call the heart mind of the universe, and it flows out to everybody. Tell me again the tribes that shared this space. The Hopi?
Yes, Hopi, Dene, Havasupai, an assortment of Pueblo peoples, an assortment of Apache peoples, Paiute. Um, let's see, there are probably some I'm missing too, because many of these tribes have subsets and groups that have different names, but they're all part of the same family. And what I've been told is that there are more than 13 nations who consider this mountain sacred. And that's because, these are not static entities. They're entities that have shifted and moved and in many cases been relocated forcibly as well. And so it's a very dynamic and fluid process. And as you say, this concept of ownership is not there. And that has been it has been really interesting for me to take part in Indigenous-led community organizing work here because when I sit in those spaces, I often hear this story of even though everyone knows that I'm descended from colonizers and I'm identified as white, I hear in these spaces all the time that this mountain speaks to everyone who lives here, whether we're aware or not. This mountain is a blessing to everyone. And therefore, it is our sacred obligation to help take care of her, all of us. And so that has been a very mind-bending, paradox-bending situation for me to take in and realize that even with all of this painful colonial history here, Indigenous peoples are still willing to consider me part of the community that basks in the blessing of this mountain.
Right.
You know,
And to help you, because it seems to me the mountain is speaking to everybody, which in my framing, we are nodes in the web of life. We are nodes in the web of life. The question is whether we are self-conscious nodes, aware of our existence as nodes in the web of life. If we are nodes in the web of life, then the web of life speaks to us. And the mountain is as much a node in the web of life as a person or a firefly or a river or an oak or a red kite. And then the onus is on us to learn how to listen. And what seems, reading your book, is that you have been through a really interesting process of learning how to listen. So Becoming a Good Relative it's a beautiful book. I absolutely and wholeheartedly, anyone who listens to the podcast, it's going to be the kind of book that really opens doors for them, I believe, particularly people who live on the colonized lands of North America, Turtle Island. But for those of us who must have relatives who were colonizers and whose lands were colonized in their turn 2,000 years ago, I think the concepts of how to work with colonialism in a way that heals all of us are so alive just now. So I wanted to read a tiny bit from quite early in the book, which is, you're right, this journey is about remembering to connect rather than divide, relate rather than control, and belong rather than exploit. Living this book has been an experiment, and I invite you to read it in the spirit of curiosity, listening between the lines for your own remembering, and that's re with a hyphen, membering. And you quote psychologist and counselor Robin Ward, writing, "Part of understanding the boundaries that exist today is sitting with the heartbreaking discomfort of the boundaries disrespected in the past." And finally, a while later, you write, "This book was written by repeatedly choosing discomfort." And that seemed to me incredibly courageous, and I wanted to honor your courage in repeatedly sitting with discomfort, because that plainly is not an easy thing, and it's something that so many of us avoid. And tell us a little bit about how you came to be repeatedly sitting with discomfort.
Yeah. Well, about 10 years ago, I went through kind of this seismic shift in my understanding of reality. And before that time, I had been living very easily in the segregated state of affairs that we have here in the United States. It is completely possible in almost all of our communities to be isolated and unaware of all of the other communities around us. We live in these little pockets, and especially those of us who are considered white and who have the privilege to live in certain neighborhoods are very easily segregated from Indigenous and immigrant and African American communities. And that's how I have been living my entire life. And about 10 years ago, I began building relationships with Indigenous peoples, and my whole worldview began to shift dramatically. And so I felt this imperative coming from my ancestors. At that time, I didn't have any concept of ancestors as beings who are still relevant or influencing our lives today. But very quickly, I began to realize that indeed they are. And so I began sitting with my ancestors at a very simple altar that I have in my house. And I felt them pulling me and nudging me and inviting me very strongly into discomfort and into situations where I was the minority, where I didn't understand anything of what was going on culturally, where I was physically uncomfortable with fasting for multiple days, etc. And so these are some of the things that led me on that path of choosing discomfort.
So the book is built on a structure of those fasting ceremonies. So tell us a little bit about how you came to discover those and then your experience of at least the first one. Let's build through different ways.
Yeah. Well, there was a day, early in my process where I was invited to an Indigenous ceremony on the sacred mountain here. And that ceremony had to do with ending fracking on Dene land. And, there were many people from different Indigenous nations present. And I made a prayer that day on the mountain, and I asked for my teacher to find me. And that very day, I was invited to support a fasting ceremony that was an Indigenous-led ceremony, traditional ceremony from an Indigenous culture here. And I was so humbled and moved to receive that invitation, and I did go to support. And in the process of supporting a fasting ceremony, I realized that I was being called to take part myself. And so I asked permission to participate. And, this is a culture that has been incredibly generous to invite people like me into their ceremonies. Not all Indigenous cultures do that. And I fully respect that they don't, and they shouldn't be expected to either. But this particular culture and group of people was ready to invite me in. And so I, offered tobacco and shook hands. And at that point, I was committed to 4 years of fasting ceremony. And it totally changed my life.
So this is four separate events a year apart.
Yes.
So you write very movingly in the book, even of your experience of supporting and being in a place where you were helping with the food and holding the space while people were out on the land. Can you tell us a little bit about that for people who don't know either side of this?
So when I began and was invited into the first ceremony to support it, I experienced something that often happens when white settlers are invited into Indigenous spaces, which is that we don't receive all of the detail and instruction and logistics and plans that we are used to.
Right.
It, and so I was told to, wear a long skirt and bring my camping gear and not much else
Right.
instruction. And
Yep.
so I was cooking meals and washing dishes and, sleeping on the ground and praying for people. We were asked to, drink water on their behalf because they weren't having any water and eat on their behalf. And my cell phone was dead, and I was just invited to be in a space of reflection and sitting with the land in deep silence.
Right. Which in
And also,
itself is a ceremonial space.
right,
It's yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
interesting. Right. So at the end of that, you felt moved and you were invited. And was there a lot of preparation that you were given leading up to actually sitting out on the land? Or again, was it wear a long skirt, turn up, come and do it? Just because
Um,
some of the native led ceremonies that I have done, we had to, for instance, eat food with no salt added for months beforehand and eat very simple, basically not ultra processed food on the way leading in as a preparation. Was that a kind of thing that you did?
there was not much instruction given. I don't usually drink coffee, and so, but the coffee drinkers are always, it's suggested that they give up coffee in advance because,
Yeah, because
you
otherwise the
know,
purging is really weird. We
oh
ask people
yeah.
not to drink coffee, and we had a friend came to one of our long weekends, so it's not a long time, and they only ever have one cup of coffee a day, and they just didn't have that during the ceremony, and were vomiting for 3 days afterwards.
Right.
So, yeah, so for everybody listening, if you're going, coffee changes your capacity to connect. It just does.
Yeah.
And not having it is going to make connection easier. And
Hmm.
weaning yourself off before you try and do that is going to do everybody a favor. So, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
True. Yeah. And then there were also many days of preparation with,
right.
for this particular ceremony, they build an altar around you. So, there I had to make many prayer ties and all the supplies that were needed to construct that altar. And
Right.
so that was part of it. And you know, that also is a very deeply meditative time to sit and do a repetitive action over many hours, and your mind needs to be focused during those hours, and you can't
Mm.
be multitasking, and you just need to be in a state of prayer. So
Yes. And having the integrity to do that, I think is huge. And I am guessing that whoever invited you saw that you were going to do that. Because it's very easy to ask people to do that. And it's also very hard to police it, and one doesn't want to have to police it. You want to be able to trust that someone is going to switch their phone off and not be multitasking while doing it. So thank you. That's really useful for everybody to hear and to know. And then we don't want to go into excessive detail, but the detail that you got in the book is that you went 4 times
mm-hmm,
a year apart, high
mm-hmm.
summer on a mountain in the southern US is quite different to high summer on a mountain in Wales, where it's going to rain all the time. At least it was before climate change. Um,
Yeah.
it sounds like, first of all, it was very hard, and second, that your experiences were very different each time, as if the gods or the guides or the spirits of the mountain were giving you uh, a series of tutorials that were going to change, and that whatever you expected was definitely not going to happen. Is that a fair
Right.
assessment?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I learned very quickly that I just need to go into this with no expectations and with a lot of humility, because it is so unimaginably difficult to go without water,
Hmm.
unbelievably difficult. And there's something about going without that particular nourishment that just brings one to their knees
Right.
immediately, almost immediately. And so yeah, I learned to just set all of my expectations on the shelf and just be completely open to whatever was going to come.
Right. And then the first one, you write in the book of a really moving experience of lying on the land and having a vision. Can you tell us about that? Because that sounds like it connects very much with the visions that we might have on this land, and that in a way it led you to begin to investigate the ancestors of this land.
Absolutely. Yes, that was one of the most magical experiences of my life. And it came after many days, I think probably about 3 days without food or water. And and I was just at the end of my rope at that point. And I laid down and I asked the trees surrounding me for help. And I was taken into this experience of going into down a stairway and into this underground habitation of this grandmother. And her kitchen was cozy and whitewashed, and rustic wooden chairs. And I remember looking out the window, and she made me a cup of tea, and she made me a piece of buttered bread. And um, there were many aspects of this experience that I found that later tied in with actual historical evidence of what our ancestors were doing in the islands of, the Celtic islands, the islands that were later occupied by the British Empire. And it was as though this grandmother spirit dropped a bunch of breadcrumbs that for me to follow. And I followed them over. It unfolded over years of time, where I would read something in a book and think, oh my gosh. Like, for example, she had meadowsweet growing on her windowsill, and she made me tea. And it was years later that I read a book that revealed that, meadowsweet was once used in the beverages, in the ales, in the concoctions that people were drinking. It was found in containers that were used in burials. It was strewn on the floor of the burials. And I just thought I had never had any exposure to meadowsweet in my life. And here she was making this tea that would this experience would unfold all of these chapters of realizing that my ancestors were once connected to the land, that they knew how to operate with each other and with the land in a respectful way, that they were Indigenous people too. And so um, it was a tremendous gift um, to receive that. And, I had to get to a very challenged place to receive it.
Right. But then it was given. And this isn't about me, but I was really interested. When I was reading that, I read it and I had in my hand a mug of meadowsweet tea, and I had got some. We hardly ever eat bread in this house. We just don't really do carbs, but Faith happened to have bought uh, a loaf, and I had a bit of buttered brown bread and a mug of meadowsweet, and I'm reading about you having that. I thought, what are the chances of that?
That
Because
is
the meadowsweet,
incredible.
it's in season just now, and I had just picked it and dried it and was drinking it because that's what you do. And then you write about her having brown skin and blue eyes. And on my Facebook feed last night, as I was reading through your book again before we recorded, there was an article came up from, I think, Nature, someone who's done DNA tests on, they did 385 sets of remains from these islands. And from 12,000 till about 3,000 years ago, most people were still brown skinned, as from Africa. It was only very recently that white skin became or paler skin became an evolutionary advantage because of the change in diet. While we were still foraging hunting, we didn't need more vitamin D from the sun. And a lot of them, about 3 to 4,000 years ago, had blue eyes. And you describe her as having brown skin and blue eyes. And there we go. And it was there in my Facebook feed. I thought the world is really, once the synchronicities begin to happen, there is such a flow, and every single one feels like magic, and the magic
Mm,
becomes alive. And so
absolutely.
I was noticing in your book so many synchronicities, so many things where the magic is happening for you as you're visiting places and having dreams. And your book has a lot of teaching dreams, which again, I would really like to explore that. Tell us a little bit about how you came to dreaming as a way of accessing wisdom and teaching.
Well, I was very fortunate to be able to go to visit the Achuar people in Ecuador through an organization called the Pachamama Alliance. And that was the first exposure that I had to understanding that dreams are a way of life. Dreams are information that help inform us of what is happening in the spirit world, what is happening with the ancestors, what is being asked of us personally, etc. I at one point I remember sitting, the Achuar people awaken before dawn. They drink a large amount of Wayusa tea and they share their dreams with each other. And the elders interpret the dreams. And so that was the first experience I had. But then as I began to know and be in relationship with more and more Indigenous peoples, I saw that that was often a practice and a value that was shared amongst many cultures. And I was very fortunate to have many teaching dreams during the years of writing this book. And it's interesting because since it's been published, I hardly ever have them anymore.
Oh,
It's
that's
like
so
it came
interesting.
for a window of time.
Right, right.
And at least in
That
this moment,
is,
yep,
I, mm,
yeah.
I've been working with dreams as a way of living for since the 80s, and there's a sine wave to it. There's
Mm,
periods where they're just throwing stuff, and then there's periods where they go, okay, you just need to process now for a bit. So maybe you're in
right,
a processing phase. I mean, I'm not, maybe not,
right.
but
No,
I
that would make
think,
a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In our teaching, we have four types of dreams, and there's the medicine dreams, which are definitely there's dreams where teacher arrives and just goes, sit down, listen to me. I'm just going to tell you stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's the ones which are more metaphorical. And then there
Mm,
tends to be the more therapeutic dreams, which are more inner process stuff.
mm,
And then there's the pizza dreams, which my teacher, when they told me that pizza dreams were the ones that, it's just the stuff of the day all thrown around and you don't really need to take notice. And that night I had a dream where I was writing in very, very tiny with a kind of, one of these funnels with cheese on it, on the tomato, the pizza, and I woke up and said, even pizza dreams have messages. And he went, yes, and if you spend all day trying to sort them out, you will never do anything else. Good point. So, so yeah, all dreams have some kind of a message. But I think one of the problems when people come to this with our teaching is that it is possible to spend all of every day trying to analyze our dreams. And I think having the gift of a sense of what's a prophetic dream, that's a whole other thing, and a teaching dream that you really need to pay attention to, and the metaphoric dreams that you can kind of let flow through in a therapeutic way, and then it's okay to let the pizza dreams go.
Right.
So, so there we go. All right. So where did your dreaming take you? Let's have a sense of it took you. It took you and held you when you were on the mountain for your 4 separate times on the mountain. We can talk about the other times a bit, but in between each one, you were a mother. You had small children. You had a family and you know the whole life of family, but you also seemed to spend a huge amount of time um, working with local people and traveling to the Celtic lands of your
Mm-hmm.
ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one of those, working with local people, working with local Indigenous peoples, or the traveling, and we'll go to the other one after. Your choice.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's see. Let's start with visiting Celtic lands
Okay.
because let's see, I believe it was 2012. I took my first trip over there and went to Scotland, went to the Scottish Highlands where my father's people immigrated from.
Yeah. Argyll.
And yes,
Yes, you
well,
went to Balquhidder.
we were in, yes, Balquhidder. And so we went to the church in Balquhidder and I saw our clan name on the wall. And this was a name I grew up, my maiden name was McFatter, and I was teased relentlessly
Yes.
as a child.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
hated that name. I hated it because I had been teased so much. But there it was on the wall. And I saw that it was part of an entire, very complex clan system,
Mm.
with some clans being kind of the protectors over others who are
Yeah.
smaller,
Yeah.
and this whole network of kinship all there on the wall. And I had never, ever experienced this sense of, oh my gosh, I come from this land, I come from these people. And I had another one of those very mystical experiences of walking up the hill behind the church, which was designated within the church as a thin place, and having this experience of time being suspended and hearing drum beats and seeing people dancing in a circle and feeling like I was up there for hours. So when I came back to my family, I realized that for them, I had hardly been gone for any time at all.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Time is such a fluid thing when we move into that liminal space, the thin space.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then I remember reading, years later, I began reading stories of the She
Right.
and the good people and the other world, and realizing that this is a characteristic of this, that time moves differently.
Yeah.
And so it was shocking to me because as someone who I had never taken any interest in this, I had no information about it, and it happened anyway.
Right. Because this was quite
You
a
know?
long time before you started setting out on the mountains.
Right, right.
Magic. Well, and then you had a dream that night. Tell us about the dream.
Let's see.
You were up on a tower and
Oh, right. Okay. That dream came
oh, was it not
when
that night?
it was not that night, but
Okay.
it was actually after I had finished supporting the first fasting ceremony.
Oh, okay. I
I
misunderstood.
had a dream in which I was standing on the top of a stone tower, and there was a man next to me who was a father figure to me, but not my own dad. And he fell over the edge of the tower onto the ground, and I was terrified, and I ran down the spiral staircase within the tower, and it felt like forever. And I finally went outside, and I saw this symbol on the ground, which is like the symbol of a Celtic cross or a
Yeah.
medicine wheel.
Circle with a cross in the middle. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, equilateral cross. And there were embers in the center of that circle. And it took me years and years to understand that dream. And even I even gained a new level of understanding after the book was published
Oh,
that
tell
that
us.
spiral staircase, that is the spiral of the double helix of DNA.
Okay. All right.
No,
And
so
also the
that
staircase you went down to Grandmother Anya, that was a spiral staircase, I think, in your book. So,
I remember it being more straight.
oh, okay. Maybe I
But
just made it spiral in my
yeah,
head.
yeah.
Sorry.
But
Okay.
it was um and so the understanding that spiral, traversing that spiral staircase is traversing the genetic memory.
Right.
It
Right.
is traversing the blood memory in my DNA. And that
Right.
those embers on the ground are, I really think of them as the heart of the masculine ancestral memory that has been so harmed by all of this war and patriarchy and
Yeah. The whole
colonization.
trauma culture is
Yeah,
designed to destroy everybody, but yeah, it's horrible.
yeah.
You have a beautiful quote in the book from Jude Lally, who's a Scottish activist and artist, and she says, reconnecting is one route to wholeness, to reassembling our missing parts. The method employed does not lie outside. Instead, it's a journey inwards, deep into our bones, our cells, our DNA, where remnants of ancient memory have been passed down through the generations. And that feels very much, I love the quotes you've assembled for this book. They're amazing. That feels like that. And you had that symbol of the circle and the cross later again in the book. You had another dream with it, I
That's
think.
right.
Tell us about that.
It appeared many times. Yes, there was a dream that came before there was a big ceremony that happened in 2019. It was led by an Oglala Lakota elder named Basil Braveheart. And it was a ceremony for repentance and forgiveness where hundreds of people came from throughout the world and they came across these divides of what you're calling the trauma culture, descendants of people who enslaved and then the descendants of the enslaved, descendants of Nazis and descendants of Jewish people whose entire families were murdered in the Holocaust, etc., on and on. And there were many issues like that were represented throughout world history. And and I was helping Basil with many of the logistics for that ceremony at his request. And in that process of helping and preparation, I had a dream that showed that symbol on the ground again and people dancing around it. And then that is exactly what happened. And even though I didn't know anything about that Lakota ceremony at the time, I was seeing it before I even
Yeah.
attended.
You were in the energetic space where it was arising and you saw what was going to happen. And I think that's one of the things that once we realize that dreaming is not bounded by time, it's easier to let go of what Daniel Lerman calls the citadel mind, which is another aspect of the trauma culture, is this belief that what happens inside is ours and what happens outside is something else and there is no connection. And it's clearly not true. But
Mhm.
I think everybody or most people need to experience its not trueness before they're able to step into the flow of it. And you talked there about people who enslaved people and people who had been enslaved. And one of the really heartbreaking parts of your book is when you discover that you had ancestors who had laid claim to land and to people. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. I It was so painful to learn that. I learned it all for the first time when I was 40 years old on the last night of 2015. I opened a book of genealogy that my great uncle had researched and written back in the 90s, and it was all there. And it flew in the face of the person that I was taught to be as a white American, because the essence of who we're taught to be is to be in denial about that and to be innocent about that and to think that it has nothing to do with us. That is the training we receive in this culture. And so all of my training was suddenly just on the rocks and dashed and my sense of identity and self had to be completely rewritten after learning that.
Right. And what
Hmm.
has it been completely rewritten to? Who, if you are now, you're bringing up your children and you're not going to bring them up in that sense of denial, how are you bringing them up? What is the becomingness of the path that you've been on?
Yeah, well, when that occurred and I received that information and I realized at that time that I was a ninth generation settler on that side of the family and my children were the 10th. And so and I also realized that although my great uncle had written and researched and put this book together, no one was talking about it. And so I realized that in my own generation, my task is to begin talking about it and to tell my children about it. And so at that time, they were, I believe, 7 and 12 years old. And so I began talking with them about it immediately. And I basically made a commitment. This pattern of denial, erasure, amnesia, it stops with me and we are going to talk about it in our family. And so my children have grown up. My daughter is now a young adult. My son is will soon be 18, and they are grounded in the knowing of who they descend from, in the sense that we are descended from people who did horrible things like receive grants of stolen land and enslave people and take part in all kinds of colonial, power behaviors. And we are descended from people who are wise, who are connected to the land, who were probably, all kinds of druids and medicine people and elders and wise people. And so I when I see them, becoming who they are, becoming more and more of who they are as young adults in the world now, I see a strength and a resilience in them that makes me so proud, because it tells me that it is possible. It is possible for present and future generations to actually work with this very difficult material and something else and create new paradigms.
Right. Right. So let's talk about the new paradigms, because that feels really important, because you published the book in 2024. I imagine you wrote it, publishing cycles being what they are, 23-ish. And we're recording this halfway through July in 2025. And I saw 2 days ago, Trump has decided to have another executive order saying that English is the only language or the official language of America. They're not going to do any woke stuff with other languages at all. He's basically, the white supremacy is rising quite fast. And I read, I can't remember the book, but I read recently someone who'd grown up in the South saying that the narrative in the South was that the South would rise again. I think it feels a bit like, I realized I grew up in Scotland and we still marked the Battle of Bannockburn. When my dad talked about it, it was like it was maybe last year and he'd lost really important people in it. And actually it was 1314. But we had beaten the English, so it really mattered. And then we also talked about Culloden and Flodden and the places where we lost. And again, it was, the wounds were raw. And they were hundreds of years ago. And I realized that the people in the south of America who'd lost the Civil War, which happened one Neptunian cycle ago, or two, I think it's two, they were planning a rerun and they were going to win this time. And they were not denying the horrors of enslavement, they were celebrating them. And the other thing that I read very recently was that the Irish had been enslaved as well after the potato famine. A lot were shipped over, and the Scots were cleared off the land, but they were just basically put in a ship and sent. And I'm guessing probably some of your ancestors they were in the Highlands and they had been cleared. The Irish were actually enslaved, and they got to a point where it was declared illegal to have a black person and a black man and an Irish woman have children, forced or not, because the children were so valuable that it was ruining the slave trade. It wasn't that they might not have wanted to have children, it was that it was spoiling somebody's capacity to make profit out of people. And it kind of makes the inside of my head explode. And I'm not one of those people. I'm, safe on the other side of the world. So you live in a space where there are people currently claiming to hold power and quite effectively holding power for a while, who are of a very different mindset than your children. And I'm really interested in the paradigm because your children will not be alone. There's been a lot of work done that I imagine the white supremacists wish to undo, and it's going to be quite hard for them to undo it. And you live in a spiritual world where there are people connected to the spirits that move across time and through space. And my felt sense is, we're back to Leonard Cohen, the cracks are where the light gets in, that the system was broken. The system was obviously broken, but it wasn't, the narrative was of the fact that it was sweet and fluffy and unicorns dancing with rainbows. And now that's definitely not unicorns dancing with rainbows. The covers have come off. It's obviously an extractive system based on the commodification of suffering. And that has to crack, I think. So I'm really curious as to what it feels like from your end and where your children's generation, how are they sensing into what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. It is surreal over here right now to watch the news unfold day by day. And also it's when you've been through a process like I've been through, it's also none of it is surprising in some way. It's simultaneously shocking and also not surprising at all. It's kind of like this is the expected outcome of 100 years of this colonial mindset that has been ravaging this place, that has been extracting and taking life and land and water as commodities. So it's a strange time to be here. It's very unsettling. And yet also I am drawing strength from I really believe that it's too late. There are too many of us awake now. There are too many of us who care that we will not be buried under this pavement that's trying to go down. And I really feel that deep in my heart. As for my children and their generation, they have faced so many challenges with the pandemic, with this rising authoritarianism, with climate change. They that generation is so challenged. They have been challenged by so many difficult things that continue to unfold, and they're gifted. I see that in my own kids and in their friends. They are gifted people who have come here at this time with special qualities to help them navigate this moment. And so for me, it's very important to get behind the youth, to support them, to listen to them, to accept that they have other ways of knowing and being and doing that are sometimes hard for me to understand, but to see those as gifts for this time and that will hopefully give them the resilience to move through this very difficult time and be part of bringing something else forward that is honoring of life.
Right, right. How can we be in service to life? Because they've not grown up with the same amnesia that you grew up with, the deliberate enshrouding of things. They've grown up with clarity. They've grown up with support from you and you sitting out on the mountain while they were growing up. And I'm wondering to what extent they dream, and I'm wondering to what extent rites of passage are available to them, because it seems that what previous generations of the trauma culture have really lacked is the capacity to move from, Bill Plotkin says, our culture, the Wetiko culture, is locked in early adolescence. And you can get to be 108 and still be an early adolescent. And what we need now is for people to grow up into adulthood and then elderhood. But you can only do that when you have adults and elders to support the growth. It's really hard for someone in early adolescence to spontaneously discover how to grow. And not every Indigenous person, but there are people holding lineages within the Indigenous peoples who know how to do this. And your children, I am projecting wildly, but I'm guessing, have access. And I'm wondering, are they availing themselves of that?
You know, they are taking their own interpretation and their own spin on the
Okay.
foundation that's been given, you know?
Okay.
So for example, like it's fascinating to me over the years as my daughter has told me her dreams, and if I as I've told her mine, I've realized that we have somehow the two of us have a version, a modern day version of what used to be called the second sight.
Right. Yes.
You know, where we see, especially when there is something that is about to happen that is very jarring and traumatic, like a death.
Okay.
We see it. We
Right.
see it before it happens.
Right.
And it is you know, in our ancestral cultures, the second sight was often considered just as much a curse as a gift because it can be
Yeah.
very
But it
unsettling.
was, we only have records from the trauma culture. I have a strong suspicion that in a pre-invasion, pre-colonial culture, it would have just been a gift. I just think
Mm,
once you get into Christianity, you're as likely to be burned alive as you are to be celebrated, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And
right,
and you're pushed right down and told to keep it quiet. But
right.
in Buddhican times, I you would have been sent off to Mona to train to be one of the teachers and the healers, I think. So how
Well,
does that
thank
land
you
with
for
you?
sharing that with me. Yeah. I I really want to sit with that because I think in some ways for me it has been um it's a feeling of grief because I'm shown something that's about to happen, but I don't know who it's going to happen to or when.
Okay, right,
And there's a feeling of, oh my gosh, could I have prevented that if only I had known, right?
right,
But then again, this is happening to me outside of a cultural context. I
right.
don't have, you know, I
Yes,
don't have a culture around me that supports
yes, exactly. Or that
this
teaches you
knowing,
how to ask further questions and ask, is this mine to do, or are you just telling me because it's useful to know? Or are you just telling me so that I understand it's possible to know these things? There's all these
right?
things, questions. It's
Right. Yeah.
interesting. In the teaching that I have, predictive dreams that involve me,
Mm-hmm.
I have the power to change. I
Mm,
have saved my life once with one of those.
wow.
Um, twice actually. And but ones that are either it's, let's say somebody famous is going to die tomorrow and I have no way of accessing them and I also don't know how or why or where. I just know that their death is going to happen. That's not mine to influence. Their journey is their journey.
Yeah.
But it may be that my knowing it is teaching me something about the process of dreaming and my connection to the dream weavers and my capacity to flow across space and through time. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It does.
So
Yeah.
I think it's really important that the predictive dreams that influence us are not this is going to happen. It's this is an option, and the fact that you have been given a dream of it
Mm,
suggests that there will come a point, and it's often the real sharp part of the dream. That's the choice point, and you can make a different choice, and
mm,
you can take the dream in. So one of my students, and I'm pretty sure I can tell this one, had a dream of her child falling into a swimming pool at a point when she was recording television stuff. And in the dream, it seemed likely the child was going to drown. And in the reality, when the child fell in the swimming pool and the TV team were all around, because in the dream, she was worried about the fact she was all covered in the gear and she didn't want to get it wet and they were going to get upset, thousands of pounds worth of recording gear. She just jumped in. In reality, it's like, saw that kid's drawing
mm,
and brought her child out. And part of the process of that was going through the questioning and answering of this happened. So the dream was maybe 3 weeks ahead of the actual event.
mm,
This feels like a predicted dream. I do not want my child to die. If they fall in the swimming pool and I'm covered in recording gear, it doesn't matter what it costs. I will go in and get them out. And
right.
and I think that's a useful kind of predicted dream.
Yes. Wow. That's a wonderful
Yeah.
story.
But I think the thing that once you start doing this work is people are having these dreams all the time, but they don't know what to do with them. And they can be frightening because if you have a predicted dream and you do nothing and the dream unfolds, you think it's fate and that you're somehow being tortured by being shown bad things happening. instead of, no, if it's you, you have agency. You always have agency.
Right.
And if it's somebody else, maybe it's just that you need to understand that time is not a linear thing, and that
Yeah.
you can swim in the timelines and see what's happening. Anyway,
Right.
this wasn't meant to be a dreaming teaching. But what I'm hearing is that the cracks are where the light gets in, and
Right.
they're not going to get their 10,000-year Reich, which pleases me greatly,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't be a fun thing. But it's also, I look at it and think that you can't have a 10,000-year Reich because biophysical reality is what it is, and you can deny the climate apocalypse as much as you like, but it's still happening. So, even if you manage somehow to lay concrete over the whole of the US, that's not actually going to stop the 10 degree C of warming. But it seems to me on that note, again, that time is not linear. You have spoken with the spirits of the mountain. You have connected with ancestor spirits, possibly a blood, maybe a spirit. Probably doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And you've had a lot of help, and the people around you are given help. And my core belief is that we would not be given that much help if it were inevitable that humanity go over the edge of the cliff into extinction. And I wonder what the people that you connect with, because you're connected with a lot of Indigenous people and doing a lot of
Mm.
work, are they speaking at all about how they see what's happening at the moment?
Yes, one thing that I've heard, and it's a good way to access information about this is to read the book Sacred Instructions by Sherry Mitchell, who is a Penobscot author and environmental attorney. And she talks quite a bit about the prophecies that have come from different indigenous cultures around the world about this time. And so that is probably what I've heard referenced the most, that we are living in a time of prophecy. And many indigenous cultures, at least from around here, have teachings about, we are in the fourth world or we are in the fifth world. There have been other worlds before us that were destroyed and then life rose again. And so, previous worlds were destroyed by fire and flood, and then this world is going to be destroyed by all of the forces. And so in a way, that's apocalyptic and scary to think about. But at the same time, it gives me a lot of comfort because it helps me to realize, I mean, think about how the eons of human history and the eons of time before the humans were even here. And we are part of that progression. We are part of that very long story. And it's so easy to get myopically focused on all of the crises that are happening right now, but it helps me to plug into the deep, deep time and to think, it could be that there will be an apocalypse here. There probably will at some point. And what is, in knowing that, what is my job? And what I land on all the time is my job is just to do the best I can to plant seeds for a life affirming future. And I may never see it. It probably won't happen in my lifetime, but that's
But
how
your
it always.
children are your seeds for life-affirming future, and they're
Right,
here. So,
right, right.
yeah,
And that's how, if you think about fruit trees, they're always planted so that the future generations will eat the fruit.
right. Yes.
That's a natural law.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm operating under. That's my
Yeah.
premise. Yeah.
Beautiful. Brilliant. Yes. I spoke to somebody for the podcast recently, and he says he works on a 200-year timescale because that's half the span of an oak tree. Yes,
Mm,
that's lovely. I had a dream recently where we were planting out some sycamores that had taken root in what was going to be my garden, but it hasn't happened. And the dream teacher said, you need to plant them here, 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 and here on the land because Faith's grandchildren's grandchildren will play in these. And I woke up so happy that Faith's
mm,
grandchildren will have grandchildren who will have a world where they can play in trees. Like, yes, let's plant the trees. Because there are times when I wake up and think that the world, the chances of grandchildren's grandchildren are not very high. But because the thing about the world ending is, how do you define world? Because if our culture ends, that would, I think, would be an extremely good thing. If we could
Mhm.
evolve a culture that was not a trauma culture, and instead find a way to create an initiation culture where people grow from childhood through adolescence to adulthood and elderhood in a way that connects to the web of life, that would be amazing. And it would be a very different world from the one that we're living in.
Mhm.
Anyway, let's come back to you and your book and your life. We're heading towards the end, and there's so much we haven't really looked at, but the book is beautiful and I really recommend everyone to read it and to explore the ideas within it. Where has it taken you since? Where are you going now?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, I'm so grateful that the book came out at the end of 2024 before the current political climate took shape as it is
Right.
now. And I have a sense of deep purpose. I am devoting a lot of my time to working with other, white settlers like myself, who are there's so many of us who are yearning for connection. We're yearning for our ancestral connection to be reestablished. We're yearning for a sense of purpose in this mess that we're living through. And so I've been working with a lot of people, teaching classes and co-facilitating groups, and it's just a tremendous privilege to do that very sacred work of being someone who it's almost like being a midwife or a companion to walk beside
Right.
people. They go through their own process, and to see people walk through these really difficult topics and realities and come out the other side into a new commitment toward reparations.
Right.
Hmm.
Uh, this opens a whole new field, but I'm really curious to, how does a culture that is predicated on genocide and enslavement, a majority culture of that, can you see a point where there's harmony and healing? I struggle to imagine how that happens without the indigenous people being given all their land back.
Right.
And then what happens? I mean, I can see why the people who are afraid that that might be an end point want to destroy everything, and destroying everything is not an answer. But how do you get to a sense of equity and balance in a world where them being given all their land back is, I just don't see it happening.
Right. Yeah. I it kind of I've kind of had to suspend disbelief
Okay.
because you're right. It is incredibly daunting project to even think about, like, how will we transform to that point, right? But on the other hand, when I work with people in individual ways or in, group settings, I see this rising spirit among us that is very organic, that networks like a natural system, that is not a hierarchy, that is spreading out like mycelial networks. People are finding each other, and we are strengthening each other and giving each other hope to say, yes, we will do it anyway. Even if we are living under an authoritarian regime, we will do it anyway. And I see that that is our real strength. Our strength doesn't come from those systems of governance. Our strength comes from relationship and kinship, and from how we relate with the land and the water. And so that I feel that over time has the capacity to create deep cultural change from the inside out.
Yes. This
And
is
that's
an
what we have.
initiation culture arising in real time.
That's
And
right.
then it spreads because it's so much more heart expandingly beautiful to live in that shared culture of reciprocity and respect and connection with the mountains and the rivers and each other. And who wouldn't want to live in that?
Right.
Right. Okay. That feels like a vision well worth working for. Yay.
Yeah.
And in your heart, you feel it's possible?
Yes, I do. And it's also I also, have to struggle with the demons sometimes of, oh my gosh, it's not possible. What am I doing? You know,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
but it's kind of like I have to tune that out purposely and say, I'm just gonna put one foot in front of the other and just keep going and not get too swept away in that fear. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Because we're not at the initiation culture yet, but we can
Yes.
see it as a light at the end of the tunnel. Wow. Hilary, I'm aware of the time. I need to let you go. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we close? Because this has been such a generative conversation, and I'm aware that I talked too much. I'm sorry, but thank you. And we'll come
Oh,
back sometime for another conversation, I would like to believe. But
oh.
just now, anything?
Yes, I would love to. And I thank you for talking because you're wonderful to listen to. Um, and I guess the only other thing I would add right now is I will share, there's a Google Doc I wrote with a guide to making a personal reparations plan.
Brilliant.
And people are interested in beginning that process. This can be a starting place to begin that process.
Beautiful.
And so I will share it with you for the show notes.
Absolutely. Yes. People
And
listening, we will definitely have that in the show notes. We'll have connections to your book and we'll have your website and anything else that you want to share going in the show
yeah,
notes.
yeah, I would say, although the word reparations gets a very bad rap in the United States and it triggers people, it
Right?
is actually the most healing thing we can possibly do, and it brings a tremendous amount of joy. So I just want to say that too, that that's one of the cultural elements that we need to build in.
Yeah. And that's one of the backbones in your book, really. And I probably didn't bring it out strongly enough, but it's you thread that all the way through. And the courage that it takes to ask for forgiveness and to say sorry and give genuine apologies and to do the work that you've done, you can feel it written in the texture of the book. But the joy that comes as a result, the connection, the genuine authenticity that arises feels so vibrant in your writing. So thank you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Show notes will have everything, people. In the meantime, Hilary Giovale, thank you so much for writing your book and for coming on to the Accidental Gods podcast. It's been such a delight.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. Thank you for having me.